Hello! The Minecraft mob vote is here, and you can say that there's a little bit of debate around it. Just a little. Now I wanted to throw my hat into the ring and give you all my breakdown of which mob should be voted on. Now this video will break down into 3 separate categories. For each mob, there are the unknown, practicality, and aesthetic. Starting off with the unknown category is for any mob that we don't know what exactly it does. Or a more specific example, we don't know what the Rascal's loot pool is, so we know it can give enchanted iron picks, enchanted iron shovels, and there's the stuff we've seen from the videos from Minecraft. But we don't know if they maybe have a small potential to give like diamond gear or something similar to that. I don't want to go too much into that because that might be little spoilers for the rest of the video. But there's a little example for you. Another one, like I said, is practicality. Now, practicality goes over what uses the mob has in terms of practical use. For example, like how the allay can be like a item sorter, simpler one, even though it's not simpler. But you know what it does? Or another thing of practicality on how frogs can be used for a farm to make frog lights, or how the iron golems can be used for iron farms, and how villagers can spawn them to make the iron farms. Now, what about those materials? Onto the aesthetic category, because I think this is a very important one. For these specific mobs, a lot of these mobs seem to have a sort of ambiance to them, and that they've seemed to be adding kind of a new look into what Minecraft mobs are. For example, the Sniffer being an ancient, like almost dinosaur, essentially in Minecraft. And then the Rascal being a kind of like sneaky, scary, mischievous mob in the mines. And the Tough Golem, who is basically a regal display to show off all your hard-worked items, and can be basically your own personal art gallery or butler, at least how I view it. And that is essentially aesthetic. Practicality is more the technical side, like the redstone and all that stuff side of Minecraft. The aesthetic is more the builder's side of Minecraft, the more visually pleasing. Also, I would like to clarify, I will writing these up categories from 0 to 5 frogs. And yes, I'm using frogs as a numeric value. For this because I love them, and they're adorable, and they're precious. I also would like to say that each one, for example, unknown, you want a high value on everything essentially. So unknown, if it's super unknown, it'd be like a 1 or a 0 even. Frogs out of 5. The practicality, if it's super practical, when it has tons of potential for farms and different uses, it could be a 4 or 5 out of 5 frogs. And we'll tally up all the numbers and it'll be out of 15 at the end. Anyways, enough rambling, and let's get to the numbers. Now, the Sniffer. Let's talk about the unknown. The Sniffer was actually described to us rather well, unlike some mobs. We know it sniffs out plants and gives new seeds to us to plant brand new plants. Added with the mob and their eggs spawn in underwater ruins. But that's it. There's a big unknown on this mob, and why it's not higher than actually 3 frogs. Are the plants even cool? Now we know they're decorative. The description for the YouTube video says they are. But if they're decorative, will they even look good enough to use? We don't know. And that's a big unknown. And that's why the Sniffer sits at 3 out of 5 frogs for unknown. Now for the Sniffer, practicality. The Sniffer actually seems to be pretty good in terms of practicality. I imagine the Sniffer being able to create plant farms out of its ability to sniff out plant seeds. Now the question then comes to, is he able to infinitely sniff plant seeds? Or is it only a certain amount in a certain area? Or if there's only a certain amount of flowers in an area? If that's the case, then I'll have to say its practicality is pretty low. But if it isn't limited, then I would say just by that, its practicality is pretty high. The fact that you can farm the brand new plants that he would introduce. So with that, I would actually give the Sniffer a 4 out of 5 frogs for practicality. Now the Sniffer, let's move on to aesthetic. Finally, we're at the final category. Now I'll be honest, I think the Sniffer lacks the most in this category because of the fact that it kind of looks boring to me. It's cute, but it also does look like an Appleton Pokemon from Pokemon. So that's something. But it is cool in terms of it being a prehistoric animal in Minecraft, which we haven't seen anything like that. But besides that, they're a little cute, and that's it. I hate to say it, but in terms of aesthetic, I can't really say much else. I am not counting the plans. I'm counting the mob. It's the plants. Sorry, not plans. I'm counting the mob itself. And I think, a 2 out of 5 on aesthetic. Sorry, Sniffer, but aesthetically, I don't think you're the best. Now, the final score for the Sniffer is a 9 out of 15 frogs. Pretty good score. Now on to someone a little more mischievous. Now, the Rascal. The unknown with him. The Rascal, well, I do love the idea of him. However, in terms of the unknown, this is a big issue with him. Probably the biggest. The reason is, and for those of you who don't know, the Rascal plays hide and seek in a mine shaft specifically. And if you find it 3 times, it gives you a reward. The issue comes in that we don't know what the rewards can be. The only rewards we know for sure is an enchanted iron pick and an enchanted iron shovel, which isn't the greatest loot. It seems to me that this mob would only help in early game. But that's the point. The unknown. We don't know what its loophole is. So it could have a low chance of giving out enchanted diamond gear, which if they're that case, would be amazing. And has potential for another category. But let's go ahead and move on to end this category. The Rascal gets, sadly, a 1 out of 5 in unknown. Now, practicality. Now, this may come to a surprise to a lot of you, but I think the Rascal actually has some really good practical uses. For example, and this is all like a hypothesis, because obviously we don't know everything, but seeing how you can fight it 3 times and it'll give you an item, you might be able to trap the Rascal, or use a lead or something to bring it somewhere and trap it. If you can, the possibility of farms is high. For example, if you were to bring the Rascal to a small area, maybe even like a farm that's built in a way similar to a hallway, with maybe areas for him to hide, and you can keep revealing him, and he'll come over to you where you're supposed to stand, and there'll be a hopper. Just toss the item into the hopper. You can keep doing that, and that's a very awful design probably. But if you actually could be farmed, probably would be maximized a lot better than that. But that's just some headcanon. Now, like I said, even with the bad loot though, unlimited enchanted iron shovels and picks isn't terrible. It does depend on the enchantments, however, and could have a chance of giving you fortune early on, which would be game-changing. So with all that being said, the Rascal actually comes out with a 3.5 out of 5 frogs. Now moving on to its aesthetic. Okay, so this one may come also as a surprise. I keep repeating myself, but the Rascal's aesthetic is actually great. The thought of seeing a little gremlin, essentially, in the mines as you're going down, it's pitch black, and you see a figure dart across the mine, and you realize what it is. And you seek it out. That just sounds so cool. And I'll be honest, I think that's awesome. I also think to add on to that, the personality of the Rascal, the fact that he hides and seems shy also makes him adorable. So, and simply, I think he gets a 4 out of 5 frogs on aesthetic. Now, the final tally for the Rascal is an 8.5 out of 15 frogs. Now, let's move on to a rather divisive mob. The Tough Golem. Now, for the unknown, the Tough Golem is actually an interesting case. We actually know most of it, it seems. So the unknown isn't really much of a factor. The only things we may not know is exactly the awake and sleep behavior of the golem, and the movement. The only other thing besides that is aesthetic things, such as using different wool color to give him a different tunic similar to a llama, or how to build it exactly, but those things are really just complementary and not essential. However, still, the awakened sleep behavior and movement do matter a decent amount. So with that in mind, it gets a 4 out of 5 on unknown. It would have been a 5, but not knowing the behavior matters a bit. So, moving on to the next category. Now on practicality. So full transparency here. The Tough Golem is probably my favorite, but however, even I have to admit, its practicality is slim to none. The only practical thing I can think it could do is maybe run over pressure plates, similar to some animals can. But he would have added the benefit of always going back to where he originally was. But since that is really the only practical use, I have to say it gets a 1 out of 5 for practicality. I'm sorry, my little Tough Golem, but you're really not that useful in a practical sense. Moving on to something he is useful for. Here we are. Tough Golem's aesthetic. Alright, so moving on to the Tough Golem's forte. Aesthetic. In my opinion, a Tough Golem would add a lot in terms of this for builds, and yes, it might make it dependent on the style of builds, but most things I feel like are that way. I imagine the Tough Golem in a bright quartz room with sea lanterns to light it up, then all lined up in statues back to back, something like that, in the middle of the room and around the corners. And they wake up, present the items around the giant room, almost like an art gallery. Then they head back to where they originally were and act as art statues, similar to like a haunted suit of armor. I think that has so much potential to look so cool. But with that being said, again, I am trying not to be too biased, but I legit see so much potential with this. I think this is inherently, bias is inherent in anything like this. So the Tough Golem, though, out of aesthetic, gets a 5 out of 5 frogs. Finally, the tally. Let's tally up the numbers. And the Tough Golem does have a 10 out of 15, meaning the winner is the Tough Golem by a very small margin of 1 point over the Sniffer, actually. Now, anyone who's mad with this or disagrees with it, I totally understand. And please tell me why in the comments. I seriously would love to hear that. I think the main kicker for the other mobs is that we just don't know. I'd rather a good mob over mobs that have a chance of being terrible or amazing. I don't want a 50-50. We all thought the glow squid would mesmerize players, and look how that turned out. Anyways, I'm fine with any mob winning, actually. In fact, just because the Rascal was last place doesn't mean I dislike it. In fact, I love the idea. And anyone who votes for it, or the Sniffer, good on you. Just pick what seems fun. Because that's what matters in the end for a video game. Having fun. Thank you all for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button. I seriously appreciate it. And look forward to more Minecraft content. I have a lot brewing. See you all in the next video, and be good people. Bye.